Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to HR Heretics. Today, we're going to do a segment on leaving your job. So, Kelli, I'm going to be honest. This has not been an area of strength for me in the past. I've had some really hard lessons on what not to do. Candidly, it's like one of those things that we should teach in school is like leaving is a really important skill and no one actually like teaches you how to do it the right way. Like when my parents leave parties, they always like Irish goodbye. So I think that was kind of like part of my upbringing.
That's where you learned it. That's where you learned
yeah,
it.
Yeah, learn skill, right? So I want to first actually go back to like, how do you know it's time? And you know, going back in your career, Kelli, like when have you felt like it's time to start looking for a new opportunity?
Yeah, it's such an important conversation. And you're right. We don't have it enough. We have tons of chats on how to get a job and negotiate and onboard. Not a lot about leaving. And it's funny. I just talked to someone driving home from a meeting on the car and gave them advice on this, like very thing, which I have to be honest, it's kind of natural to me. I feel like I'm pretty good at it. So I love that you said you're not good at it. And I'd love to understand more about why. And of course, we're not talking about leaving in terms of, you know, getting terminated or laid off or whatever. We're talking about quitting and resigning. And so to answer your question, like, when do you know it's time? I'd love to hear your view on that, Nolan. But for me, you know, I kind of know it's time when, and, you know, we go on this podcast to be real. And everyone always says, when I stop learning or when I like, come on, like, yes, but I know it's time when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to go to this meeting. I don't want to do today. Like, cause I'm one of those, you know, masochists that really love this job and love the intensity and love the stress and for me, it's more of like when I'm dreading the day and it's sucking energy from me, I know it's kind of time. And some of that might be boredom or maybe I'm not learning, sure. But I think we should dig into the real nature of like, when is it freaking time without the usual fluff of I'm not learning anymore.
Totally. So there's like a couple heuristics that I use. One is that, you know, you're describing energy and I actually like to do energy audits. So even if you're working on something really hard, but if you get energized by that thing, like that's a good thing versus, you know, what you just described is like the energy suck to where like every day you're like dreading it or like you're just so exhausted, not because of like, you know, your brain's been firing on every cylinder, but because you're just tired of bullshit. And, you know, what gives you energy and figuring out what gives you energy, I think is like a really important heuristic. You know, I think it was Michelle Weaver that said you should be running to something.
Yes.
And I've thought a lot about that since she said it. And I think it's such a good one. And so, you know, the running to something thing, I would frame underneath you should just always be having conversations, always be building your network, always just be open to conversations. Like when recruiters reach out, take the call, like be curious about what's going on. But don't just, you know, you can't have one foot in your current job and then one foot in like the job search market. I think that's a terrible way to do it.
Yeah.
But I do think just being open to things. And so if you feel like you're running towards something and you feel that energy, like that's a good heuristic as well. I know you said like the learning thing is a little bit trite, but like, I don't know. I actually, it matters to me. Like that's one of the core ones for me is learning and impact.
I just wanted, I guess for me, it's just, let's dig into what exactly that means more than just say, you know, I'm not learning. Cause I do think there are shades of gray in that, you know what I mean? And back to what Michelle said, Michelle Weaver, on that episode, you know, I've seen one pitfall in that, running to something. People will stay in their jobs and be miserable, you know, because they're waiting until they're running to something. And I'm not saying you should just leave. And because a lot of people, myself included, a certain time couldn't afford to like wait and not work until something comes along where you're running to it. You know what I mean? So, but it's a dangerous slope. You just have to be aware that if you're going to stay in your role that you're unhappy and miserable, just be careful not to shoot yourself in the foot. Because I believe if you stay in a role for a long time like that, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and you become not great anymore. right? And that just backfires on yourself. And so you just have to be aware. And I'll end by saying the best way to defend against any of that is to do exactly what you said, which is not feel bad about having conversations, about talking to recruiters, about testing your value and your market value. And a lot of people feel bad about taking calls. And it's like, no, you don't have to want to leave to take calls. It's the best way to smooth things out. And when a time does come, those things will kind of merge together versus forcing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I say this term all the time, but it helps expand your surface area of luck. If you never take calls from recruiters, then, by definition, your surface area is much smaller. But if you meet a recruiter and they pitch a role to you and it's not a fit for you, well, you could actually still be accretive in the relationship by maybe leveraging your network and referring other people. And then they start thinking about you more. So it's not all zero sum in recruiting. And I think people don't think about it as nuanced as it possibly could be. Taking one quick step back, where we should have started is it's bespoke. Like this is, everybody's in different situations. I've said this a million times on the show. Like I grew up in a household that didn't have any money. Like my electricity got shut off as a kid. When I got my first job, it was like, I must keep this job. And like, I need to like do everything I can to absolutely kill it here. And so just understanding that like, having your finance situation first dialed in is like thing number one. But actually like what I learned is as my boss moved over to Google, and I was exploring that opportunity once he got there, is like, because I took that call from him and because I was open to that, I then had the opportunity to kind of get a promotion when I left that job. And so I think another heuristic is it's not just about money, but it's like, if you can like change levels and if you could change your ownership and what you're working on to have it be a bigger scope, that's another thing for me that I've always factored.
Right. Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the number one concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. A greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelli from HR Heretics sent you.
Right. Which to my earlier point is a double click on learning, right? That for me is a very pertinent example of learning. And I think tenure also is something to look at. I remember back in 2009, I had a real talk chat with a friend at Yahoo, and I'm like, listen, you've been here 9 years. It's not that big of a company at this point. Like how are you doing new things, stretching, to your point, learning? And then there's the people that don't want to. And it's like, hey, we should celebrate those that are like, I'm not necessarily learning anything new, but I love what I'm doing. And it goes back to clarity of identity. Who are you? What do you want? What are you trying to do?
Well, we should also be clear, though, that you just brought up a really good point around tenure. And I was thinking initially around job hoppiness, but what I want to say first is like, there's actually a barbell issue there. So on one side, everyone knows job hoppy, don't want to be job hoppy, which is generally like, don't leave a job within 18 to 24 months, roughly. Yep. But then there's the other end of the barbell, which is like, we all tell ourselves stories when we don't have information on somebody. And what recruiters do when they look at your profile, and if you've gone from job to job to job to job every 6 to 18 months, you're job hoppy. But if you've only been at a place for 10 years, then the other story that they tell us is like, well, they're just resting, investing, they're coasting, they're not learning anything anymore. And this is where you just have to be aware of the potential narratives about you versus like complaining about what those narratives might be. You have to be aware of them so then you could speak to them when the time is right for you to start exploring new opportunities.
Yes. We just talked about this yesterday on our segment on back channels.
Yeah.
Context is everything. Making, just sweep judgments based on something very surface level is not. Like I just talked to someone last week and they had been in a company for double-digit years. And they said, every year it was like a new company. Great. How? How did the role change? How did the skills grow?
Yeah.
How did the challenges differ? And I do believe that. I believe companies can change, but so that the narratives are not complete with hoppiness or you're stale because you've been there for 9 years.
But you have to be able to describe it to the lowest level of detail, and that's where I think people go wrong. Okay, second thing I want to talk about is how do you put in notice? So Kelli, what's your strategy with putting in notice?
Yeah, look, I've always been really, really loyal, and the notices have always been long. It's always been kind of this phased, planned approach. I don't think I've ever given 2 weeks notice in my career or even a month. I mean, my notice at Hired, I believe, was 7 months notice. Now let's talk about what has to be true. We've talked about this before with succession planning. It has to be a safe environment where people are mature and you trust them and you're like, Nolan, you're not going to be here forever. What are you thinking? Well, I think in 8 months, it's probably time. Great. Let's start having a conversation where I can trust you. That's just between us. And we start stealthily working backwards from those 8 months and planning business continuity, career pathing for others, succession planning for you. That is the best way to do this. The worst way to do it is I'm giving you 2 weeks, I'm leaving, and you're caught flat-footed. You're probably angry. You're panicking. There's no succession planning. The business is going to be at risk because of it. And I just want to talk about the reasons that cause that. And we've talked about this before. I believe it goes back to fear of security and repercussion if I put my cards on the table and get bit.
And so the heuristic here is the relationship with your manager and your leadership team.
That's correct.
And so if we're giving advice to people that, or I'm putting in notice, I would say, obviously you're worried about your life. You're worried about like your relationship with your manager. You're worried about like getting off on the right foot, with the next place. You're worried about like, in Kelli's situation, if she's talking 8 months in advance, she's not like interviewing right now. She's not ready to jump out the door right now.
Right.
But like that requires a deep level of trust with management. And so you have to be very thoughtful if you're putting in advance notice. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, if you don't have that relationship with your manager, I do think sometimes, even though it's not great, 2 weeks notice is fine. I mean, that is what the industry standard is. We hope that you have a better relationship with your manager so you can have a series of conversations about what works great for you and how that can work great for the company. But the reality is if you have hesitation then my feedback to you would be give the standard 2 weeks.
Yeah. And my 2 adds to that is, again, don't be naive. Don't say, well, I'm giving you 6 months and not be aware that maybe you don't have a good relationship. Or again, I'm going to be real. What is the perspective and perception of your performance and your impact to the company? Because if it's not like good to great, at least good, hopefully great, they're going to be like, thanks, Nolan, for the 6 months, but you can go. You can go in 2 months. 2 weeks. And you might be like, oops, well, I don't want to.
So that actually happened to me. So
that's incredible. It's incredible.
When I left Google, I gave 4 weeks notice, and I had a vesting day on the Wednesday before the Friday I wanted to leave. And I thought I had a great relationship. And, I thought like everyone, I was going to DoorDash. It was like a bigger opportunity for me. I thought everybody understood. They walked me out on the Monday before the Wednesday, so I didn't get that vest. And it was, I'll be candid with the audience, it was $10,000, which still is a big deal to me. At that time, that was like more money than I had ever seen. And that one really hurt. Now we're almost 10 years removed from that. And what I would tell people is I wouldn't change anything about it. Even though I got screwed, I actually feel like I did the right thing. I wanted to give the team notice. I gave the team plenty of notice. I ended like those relationships, at least from my side of the table, I feel very proud of. But I did get taken advantage of that situation. And so like, if you have vesting coming up, if you have like big financial milestones that are, around the corner, you do need to protect yourself, or at least factor that into your decision making.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate in every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes. It's a great point, and I am very perturbed. That is an awful thing to do. Like, I don't think I've ever once done that or thought about that. In fact, it's been like, hey, you're giving notice. Even if it's 4 weeks and we don't need you, you honor that and keep the vesting. Like that is just the poorest form ever. But I do have a lot of conversations and people asking for a lot of advice. Like, hey, I'm going to give notice. I have this vesting. I have a bonus coming up. Like, how should I think about that? And It's not a one-stop shop with one answer.
Yeah. And you just, you have to always remember it's a business on the other side of the table. And so I take full ownership for doing it the way that I did. And again, I wouldn't change it. Now that's coming from a very privileged perspective that I have today. And so you just need to be able to think about yourself, number one, because the business is always going to think about itself as the number one priority, not about you.
I hope they would change it. That is,
I know it's not great, but like it's a lesson that I've given many people who've asked me about after the fact. Okay, let's shift gears into great. You've put in notice. You've transitioned out. How do you think about maintaining relationships at the company that you just left?
Yeah, it's a great point, because it's easy just to kind of stop and move on. To be very tactful, I will literally put a monthly calendar invite in my calendar to reach out to, I would say cap it at 10. If I have 1,000-person company, probably 10 people a month. And it doesn't have to be a thing. It's just like, hey, texting, how's it going? You guys need anything? You all need anything? Any help? Any advice? I'm here. And sometimes they won't need anything. Touch points are really important. It's not disingenuine. You kind of miss those people usually, when you're going. So I just forget. It's not that I don't want to, I just forget. So I literally use my calendar, and I will say, reach out to Todd, right? I'm talking with Todd next week in San Francisco.
It's just for the audience. So that's the CEO of Pendo,
yes.
Right? So that's not only just like somebody who Kelli worked with, that's who Kelli reported to. So this is the area that I am most embarrassed of in my career.
I mean, this is a great episode. You should just get horizontal on the couch and let it rip.
I feel like I am. Like, do you have
rip.
a tissue box? So this is the area that I am like so embarrassed about. And the reason why is because, the story I told myself specifically with, actually, I guess with both direct reports and to people that I reported to, but more so with my direct reports. It's like, I didn't want to be that person who left and was like, oh, hey, how are things going? Like, let's go get coffee and like, give me the dirt. It just feels like, it feels so like high school-y. That what I told my directs, I was like, hey, when I leave, like, I'm not going to like ping you all the time. Like, you ping me if you ever need anything. Mm-hmm. And, one of my directs, I'll shout her out, Talene, gave me really good feedback a couple of years ago. She was like, that was terrible. And she's like, I needed you to like check in on me to like see how I was doing. And it didn't have to be like, you were like all up in my business all the time. And she was totally right. Like, there's nuance there. I like the monthly one. Probably, I think for me, the right cadence would have been like every 8 to 12 weeks. But just less so about how the business is doing and like how things are without you. Yeah. And more so about how that person is doing.
Yeah. Forget
and
the
maintaining
dirt,
those ties.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have the ability to delineate what was happening in the business and my relationship with the people who worked at that business.
Yeah. And for me, didn't seem a natural I mean, these are people that you talk to usually 2 to 3 times a day, every day.
Exactly.
So once a month, I mean, it's like, hey, how's the fam? What's going on? How's the beach house coming? It's you miss these people. It is human nature. So.
Yeah, for sure. So be more like Kelli on this one. Definitely do not be more like me. But I have learned, and
the
I
old
think
you.
Like that's
the old
yeah,
you.
Exactly. And this, to our point, in one of our last segments is like people learn, people grow. You learn from your mistakes. Yeah. And one of the things that we're committed to doing on this show is being super candid about those, so you don't make the same mistakes that we made.
Love it.
Cool. All right, let us know what you guys think.
All right, thanks all.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.